I have a question in general for this new format. Do we just want to have one person run through like one of these sections, or should we each speak to these points that our names are next to?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Seth. I guess I'll kick it off and I'll answer that as I do so. Yeah, this is the 11.6 retrospective for GitLab. So GitLab 11.6 was released on the 22nd of December. Normally we'd have the retrospective a bit closer to the release date, but obviously with the holidays, we decided to move it back a little bit. I'm Sean McGivern. I'm the engineering manager for the plan team. Normally Tommy Morgan, who's the director of the development side of things, would run this, but he's not available today, so I'm taking it in his place. We've had a slight change in format for this month. So we've put things under sort of themed headings. Actually, because we have, I think last time I checked, 4 pages of retrospective, I was just going to run through the entire what went well this month and what went wrong. And I'm going to leave space for people to come in and mention any point that they think is particularly significant that either I missed when I was summarizing the doc or that isn't mentioned in the doc. But I do want to spend most of the time, if possible, on the how we can improve section, because we've got a lot in the agenda, which is great, but we do only have 30 minutes. And I've already taken one of them on this. First of all, from the last retro, I could only actually find one issue that we had created. And it looks like we've pretty much got to consensus on that. And that was about introducing some standards across our Golang-based projects, because we have quite a few of them now. And for things like logging and so on, it's good to have a baseline there. It looks like Philippe's volunteered to take that. Philippe, great, thank you. Please assign the issue to yourself and go ahead and do it. That's an easy one, thank you. What went well this month? A big one seems to have been cross-team collaboration. A bunch of people have mentioned things here. So specific callouts, UX has been mentioned a few times there. In fact, in all of the first 3. Front end and back end, as you'd hope, but again, it's really great to see that happening. And then Liam, also from the managed team, wanted to particularly call out the distribution team for helping get an omnibus issue shipped, because most backend engineers don't spend a lot of time working on that, so we always need help when we do. Group calls, so teams are having team calls and groups are having group calls, depending on which you are. So the configure vehicle, it sounds like it was more of a group call because it involves people from backend, front end, etc. Whereas the Geo one might have been a team call. So I'm calling them group calls for the sake of consistent language. It sounds like those are really good. So that's something I'll see if I can implement in the plan group as well, because sounds fun. Elliot wanted to mention that the maintainer training program is going well. I think it is. Also, Genshin is now a maintainer, so we are 1 maintainer up on where we were a month ago, which is good. We still have 7 people in the trainee process, so hopefully that number will continue to go up over the coming months. Maren's got a few things about the deployment, which now has a dedicated delivery team. So we have automatic deployments from chat ops tagging, which is super cool and much better than our previous stuff. And after some issues, we did manage to get the CE to E merge automated and happening pretty much instantly. We've already caught an issue that happened basically the next pipeline that it could have possibly happened, which is really great. And then finally, Dower just wanted to call out that feature flags are really helping, because there is an exemption to the feature freeze process if a feature is behind a feature flag, and that's quite a tongue twister. And it means that you don't have to make that binary decision like, do I ship this in a state where it's okay but not great, or do I leave it for a whole month? You have that third option that gives everybody a bit more control about how the features rolled out. So all good news. What went wrong? So this was one of the things that Maren mentioned about the bumpy start. This automatic C to E merge was also reversing stuff, and that caused some confusion when it happened because people weren't expecting it. QA failures, I think there's also some stuff further down that Mex added up here that we might be able to move into this section, but we have QA specs. They aren't always run on, they aren't always obvious to people when they fail, like if they are failing because it's this MR or if it's because the framework itself, or if it is this MR, like why is it this MR? And the whole sort of process around QA specs and review apps is still flaky, which is basically the same thing. Like, it's not clear where the responsibility lies for that. There's also some stuff about pre-planning. So teams are finding that they have either issues, the scope of the work that they're doing in the milestone changing throughout the month because something that was originally included is not now valid anymore, or it's taking a lot of time to go through and decide what each iteration is and go back and forth with UX on that because it's a big feature and there's no actual time set aside to plan that out in a more formal process. On my team, we had 2 different cases where 2 people worked on issues that touched pretty much exactly the same lines, but it was 2 different people both times. So that sort of duplicated some work and wasn't an ideal process. And Liam from Manage mentions that they've had issues with just having too many issues in the milestone. So the actual target that we set ourselves is typically 70% of the issues in the milestone to be completed because we want to be ambitious. But if it's closer to 55%, then obviously that's not great and something we can improve. Philippe's mentioned that there were a lot of Go MRs and not enough people to review them. I don't know, Philippe, if this was, so when you say silo, do you mean like because the people are on different teams or just because there just aren't enough? End of story.
I think it was specific to us. We have a lot of Go merge requests in 11.6, and since it involves a lot of business logic, I was the only one in the team being able to review that. So that's why we are pushing this idea of having a pool of reviewers company-wide for Go. And that's something that is at the top of the document, and we're going to introduce very, very soon.
Great, thank you. And then there was an issue for some issues with the GDK. So both of the issues that I've linked to there are to do with CI runners, so it won't affect every team. This is why I asked for the links, because I was like, I don't remember anybody on my team having this, but my team don't typically run CI runners locally. But obviously it's a blocker if it's not working. And then Andy has also mentioned that, Andy from the UX team on Secure has also mentioned issues with the actually getting representative data to be able to like test things locally. We've got a merge request that was too big. So the balance between refactoring and matching our definition of done. Maren mentioned that when we were getting close to the feature freeze, we had a red master across the C and E repos, and new commits were coming in even with red specs. I think we have more about that further down, so we can talk about that more further down. We had, I think everybody knows, we've been fixing a lot more security issues due to the Public HackerOne program, due to the different timelines that we have now. And there was an issue that I don't have a link to at the moment on the verify side, where there was actually some functionality gone because of a security fix.
The issue is not public yet, so I don't know if it makes sense to link to it or
okay.
How openly to even discuss it. So
is the replacement public?
I'm trying to find it. I don't know if it actually is.
Okay, well we can leave that for now. Thank you. Yeah. There were 3 critical security releases as well. So we have a monthly security release, but a critical security release is a separate process to that. And we didn't actually have those we did have those in the month, but we had those over a 2-week span of the month. which every critical security release has an impact on the general release process, because it's basically stop everything around the general release process and get this done. Marin has, under his delivery and distribution hats, a couple of dogfooding issues. So we broke service desk again. We had an issue with the Kubernetes runner for package promotion. And we had issues with the package server and S3, which was pretty frustrating, trying to actually get the packages uploaded. Stan's mentioned some P1 and P2 issues in the release candidates for 11.6, which were all in the first one that was deployed after the feature freeze. Annoyingly, annoyingly, these have come from like strange places. Things like the last one is due to frozen strings. So that's not really a change that you can put behind a feature flag. The answer is that the spec should fail when that happens, but we can talk about that further down as well. Stan's also linked to a couple of commonly reported issues in the final 11.60 release. And because I think we don't have an 11.62 yet, that because 11.6.1 was the security release, these are still getting frequently reported by users. Mex mentioned a case where the QA team, the quality team, sorry, mentioned that the QA tests would break with this change. And then we merged it and the QA tests broke with that change. So that's obviously not ideal, and we need to figure out a way to handle that. And finally, for this section, we had a broken master. I think this is to do with the point Marin mentioned earlier about the broken master, actually, or at least related to it, about the docslint Docker image being outdated and failing, which then fails the pipeline, which, you know, we don't want to get into the habit of thinking the pipeline's red, but we know that job's not super important. Like, you know, we want to be able to have that as just a thing that we know it's green if it's supposed to be green. So I've done a lot of talking. Rachel and or Dylan, do you want to talk about the group calls, beer calls, etc., and what you're planning for those?
Yes, so I'll speak for Dylan since he couldn't join. So regarding the group call, so the configure team did this the first time. We call it the beer call, and it's just where the entire team is having like a group coffee chat. And those are the kind of things that are easy to deprioritize because everyone is so busy kind of doing their own things and their own deliverables. But we really found that that kind of gets you a better cohesion of the team when you get to know each other on a personal level and you can kind of have this group conversation. It's just helps the team gel better, and that kind of leads us to work better. So we really found a lot of value in it. I would encourage everyone to do that as well. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, thanks. I think that's a pretty uncontroversial one, so I'm going to move on. I don't think Rachel's on the call, but Seth and Elliot and Liam all are, so I'll let you take over with the more time in planning section.
Sure.
Seth, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'll start. So my point is calling out something that that we ran into in this milestone, which is for one of our larger issues, we found that we were sort of designing, UX designers were working on the design for the feature at the same time that we were building it, and that did not work well. I think, when we have smaller issues, we've been able to do that where there's enough time within the cycle to make that happen. But for the bigger things, we just need to make sure that we do our pre-planning better and get that done up front, or more of it done.
Yeah, I think it's super similar for all of us that have raised it. But instead of, I think for us, it's even just on the back end side, we're having the problem as well. Like, we're not, with the feature freeze looming, people feel like they don't have the time or the ability to put aside what they're working on to plan and talk about the next thing for the next release. And so what my plan to try and help us with that is just to ask people to upfront block some time in their calendar every week, split up however they want, to dedicate to talking about the next release's issues. And so hopefully just trying to carve that time out well in advance so that you know about it. It's already there, and it shouldn't get, or it's hopefully less likely to get kind of stomped on by last minute things.
Okay, thank you. Seth, Bob had a question about the UX Ready label. Bob, I don't know if you want to add some more detail.
Yeah, I thought that, I don't know if this is across all teams, but I thought that that's how we used to work. Like we prepare the UX in advance, and when UX is done with the issue, they apply the UX Ready label. The assets and whatever screenshots are in the description, and that's when we start development of that issue, like backend and front end development of that.
Yeah, I think we do still do that, and ideally that's what we should be doing. And we've just run into some instances where we're trying to compress it too much, like compress the timeline too much, and so we're not getting fully UX ready, I guess, by the time we really need to start development. We're trying to overlap them too much.
I see that we have Tori and Andy from the UX team on, the two I found quickly looking through the participants list. I don't know if either of you want to sort of speak to that about how the UX team think about that label and how this is supposed to be working.
Yeah, we add UX ready to issues that basically have the majority of the UX work complete. But that doesn't necessarily mean we want to move towards a waterfall process where UX is working on something and then just handing it off to engineering. So we want to make sure that front end, backend, and UX is all working together throughout the process. So that doesn't necessarily mean that because we have this label, UX is doing it, and then we add the label and then engineering starts. It should really be a collaborative process throughout the whole milestone and even before.
Does that help, Seth and Elliot? Do you think that's a thing we can, I suppose more Seth was talking about the UX situation, right?
Yeah, and I think it all just comes down to not doing enough pre-planning. So whether that is, it's not just up to UX to do that pre-planning, like Tori said. We just need to start that work earlier and not try to compress it all into sort of just the month that we have, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Liam, sorry I cut you off earlier. I just figured your point was slightly different on this. So do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Yes, I think you're right. It's slightly different in it's more about a bit more planning around what we're committing to rather than the allocation of time, if you will. One of the things we were considering was looking at the due 22nd label, which, Sean, I know you tried with the plan team, which I think the biggest benefit we potentially saw there was splitting the milestone into two, which might give us a better idea what we can deliver in sort of 2 weekly chunks. From the discussion that we've had, it seemed for your team maybe the reward wasn't worth the kind of the overhead that came with that. So maybe there's a lesson to be learned there. This is largely
so much about overhead. It was just more that basically we got to the point where all the due 22nd issues were security issues, and hopefully we wouldn't be in that situation in like 3 months' time. But that was where we were at the time, and we were like, well, we think we're, being able to use a single ranked list, which is a thing we've talked about across engineering and across all different stage groups, is kind of doing the same thing, but the secondary effect or another effect that we wanted from that due 22nd label, which I think we did get, which we don't necessarily need the due 22nd label to do, but is a very helpful way of framing it, is to try and make sure that you don't have many issues in the milestone that can't be done in a 2 week chunk. Because that's a good way of encouraging you to keep issues small, right? Like that's one of the things we want to do.
Yeah, and I think related to that, so a lot of this came from the team call that we had in response to kind of the point that you made earlier in terms of maybe we're slightly under delivering compared to what we're committing to. We certainly want to be getting engineers more involved in the scope of what we're committing to, and we're going to try and split all of the issues up to make sure that everyone believes that they can be delivered, whether it's in kind of a 2 week period or slightly more. So I think that feels like maybe a smaller change that we could try first before splitting everything into two halves, if you will. Incidentally, having looked at where we are for 11.7, I think we've actually improved there, and I think we're a bit more realistic with what we were committing to anyway. But I think it's more about making small changes to experiment sort of what improvements we can make there.
Okay, sounds great. If anybody wants to jump in on this, feel free, but I'm just going to move forward to Philippe, which is, I think, a really good improvement and one we sort of talked about earlier, but creating a pool of Go reviewers. Philippe, do you want to add anything in particular to that, to what you put in the doc?
No, I think it's special. It just, we have a pool for Ruby. It makes sense to have a pool for Go. I think we have enough projects to start doing that now. So let's do it. Thank you.
Cool. Next up, so Marin. Yes, you are on the call. Sorry, I couldn't find you for a second there. So you want to talk about merging while master is read?
Yeah, so it's really hard, obviously, with a feature phrase date coming up. Everyone tries to merge their things in, and it's very easy to say the pipeline is read because of an unrelated change. But what usually happens is unrelated change covers up a very related problem. So once you merge into master, this becomes a release manager's problem. And this month, with flaky pipelines and the amount of security releases we had, this was extremely stressful. So I was proposing a change in the merge request that was linked there, that feature freezing is no longer just tied to the date, but also to the green pipeline at the discretion of the release managers to ensure that we can continue deploying and delivering things. Sean, you had a question there, and probably because I wrote the rest, I don't really understand what contradicts what. So.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So your first link is the one about broken master takes precedent over all other work. But it also says it's okay to merge a major request with a failing pipeline if the failure also happens on master and the failing specs are not directly related to functionality touched by the merge request. So an example of this would be if we make a wording change in the UI, for instance, and a migration spec is broken in master for some other reason, the intent behind that was that we can still proceed with that wording change. Like, we're not just blocking everything behind and then making everybody either rebase their merge request or merge master into their merge request. And
right.
Sort of thundering third issue with the pipelines.
Yeah, thanks for that clear up. I'll be changing that description in the handbook as well. If there is no outstanding comments in the merge request that is for process change. I think it is problematic even for the small changes because the flaky tasks actually affect everyone, and that can easily come from smallest possible change as well. So it would be way better if we get to fix the problem or resolve it in some way before we continue further, because we when we cut the final stable branch, we actually had red tests in the stable branch, so that doesn't really work at this scale anymore.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like it's trying to move things to a more sequential model, though, which is kind of like the opposite of
temporarily, while we try to speed up the tests a bit more so that we get faster feedback and
right. Well, we had a test failure the other day that I worked on that was due to the Docker build image being updated. So like no code change caused that. And if we blocked everything while that was being fixed, then we wouldn't really get very far.
But we also have to have some confidence that what we ship is actually working, right? So
yeah, no, I agree.
The only way to do that, yeah.
I think these are two separate things is what I'm trying to get at. So you've got an issue there about the feature freeze is on green pipelines. And then you're also saying don't merge into master if it's red. But it seems to me that if we merge into master and it's red, but the feature freeze applies to green pipelines, then we don't maybe need the other merge request right away. We can make one change, see how that works, then make the other change. But if you want to create an issue for the second point, the no merge until and merge request until for no merge until master is green again, we can happily discuss it there.
Yeah, sure thing.
Cool.
Yeah, something
again,
else that I would bring up there, just to kind of wrap up this subject. Right now, if there's like a failure in master and then multiple branches, feature branches are created off of master in that time span, then all of those merge requests, of course, are going to go red. So all of them would need to be rebased on master and again before they can actually go green themselves. But I happen to know that the Verify team is working on this really cool feature that will actually show you the pipeline result of like the pretend merge of the current merge request into master. So as long as that one gets updated after the fix gets into master, there will be a green pipeline on the merge request, even though the merge request feature branch would still have a red pipeline. So then I guess the next step would be to make our merge on pipeline succeeds feature smart enough to take that into account too, so that we're not going to have to wait for dozens of people to rebase their merge request before we can move on. But yeah, if you're going to create an issue on that, Marin, then I'll gladly bring it up there as well.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Dara, do you want to take the next point as well?
Yeah, gladly. So I'm covering for Nick here, but of course I can kind of summarize. On the Create team, when we are working on functionality that in some way interact with the actual Git repository on disk, that means that we go through Gitly. And that means that in a lot of times when we implement functionality like this, it actually requires changes across a couple of different projects. And obviously that adds some amount of overhead, as we on the Create team have all gotten to experience. And Nick decided to kind of start some more discussion on how to reduce some of that overhead. So if you're interested in being involved in that, then I suggest checking out those links. We haven't reached a particular conclusion yet, but this is increasingly proving to be a problem on our side, especially as you might have people working on the GitLab, Gitly proto project in parallel, and their changes are interacting, conflicting, and all that stuff. So that's something we're looking into. One solution that had been brought up at some point was to mono repo everything. I don't think that's quite the conclusion we've reached yet, but yeah, you might want to weigh in there if you have anything to add. And otherwise, we might update you in a couple weeks or months on how we actually resolve this.
Cool, thank you. Stan and Mech, I'm gonna hand over to you for the whole QA section here, if you don't mind. So go ahead.
Sure. Stan, you want to start first with the end-to-end test?
Sure, I just would like to suggest that we make end-to-end testing kind of a part of our workflow. Right now, it seems like an afterthought. It seems like mostly the quality team is working on it, but I think as Ash demonstrated with Geo, it has a lot of value in catching things. So, you know, I had a merge request earlier in the week, and I said, oh, I'm just going to test the Geo stuff, and I don't have to set it up myself, and it was a big help. So I wanted to call out the Geo team for doing that. But there are a couple of issues that we talked about earlier that were commonly appearing in this release, and one was just to activate the push rules, right? That has been a big source of pain for a lot of our releases. And then an end-to-end test for Service Desk, and I think Shani, you made a good point that this particular issue would have been caught by a better unit test, but obviously I've seen another occasion where Service Desk wasn't sending emails, and that would have caught that occasion too. So.
Yeah, I want to raise some awareness here as well. So we have test plans working for Create, Plan, and Manage, and testing should be done as part of the development process, right? So it should be not an afterthought. The next one I want to raise is the broken QA suite. So we have an event that caused QA to break for 4 days, and it affects patch releases, security releases, because we use that to measure whether the functionality is working or not. And I'm going to tag on to Marin as well that a broken QA test should be treated as the same urgency as broken master. And if it's soon to be broken, that's soon to be broken master as well. So the proposal is there. I'm gonna take on to update the handbook as well. But want to bring this up to discussion that a broken QA test is as severe as something that's broken in the pipeline. It's going to block everybody. It's going to cause hardship with the release managers and the patch release and the release process as well.
I'll just add, Mac, to yours item there is that we are using GitLab QA to trigger tests on staging. So current pipeline looks like something gets deployed to staging. We fire off a number of QA tests, and then we decide whether we are moving on or not. If there is a smoke test that's failing in QA, we are not proceeding further with deployments to Canary in production because we have no confidence that the crucial, important features are working. So this is going to expand the more QA tests we add to the smoke suite. So this is becoming way more important than before now that we are moving to automated testing there.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And if we catch it in master, obviously, before it gets deployed to staging, then we save ourselves a whole bunch of time later on. So the final thing was just a reminder to myself. I only found one sort of issue from last time to follow up on, and Philippe's already taken that. I'd also like to add Philippe's issue from this time as a follow-up issue. Philippe, if that's okay, I think you're already working on that. Mech, I would have liked to add your issue, but I see it's on 11.8. So do you want to take that as an action for the 11.7 retro, or do you think it won't be ready by then? And Marin, also, if you can create an issue for your one, and then we'll add the label and add it to this document.
I'll move mine to 11.7. And I'll
Perfect. Thank you. So I'll pick 3. I'll be greedy and I'll pick 3, but I think the 2 master merge ones are related. So I'm going to justify it that way. Obviously, if anybody wants to create any further issues, please use the retrospective 11.6 label, and then we can see them all next time. But those are the 3 I'm picking for this time. Thanks very much for your time, everybody. I appreciate it. We're right on half past the hour, so we don't have a lot of time left. Oh, Dawa says we're over by 1 minute, so I think my clock's out of sync with his. Eric has product office hours, engineering office hours next, or Eric B has product office hours coming next. If you work at GitLab, if you're watching externally or watching the recording, then obviously that doesn't apply. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.